Pat of Silverbush by Lucy Maud Montgomery, first published in 1933. God gave all men all earth to love, but since our hearts are small, ordained for each one a spot should be beloved over all. Kipling. To Alec and May and the Secret Field. Chapter 1 introduces Pat. Part 1. Oh, and I think I'll soon have to be doing some rooting in the parsley bed, said Judy Plum, as she began to cut Winnie's red crepe dress into strips suitable for hooking. She was very much pleased with herself because she had succeeded in browbeating Mrs. Gardner into letting her have it. Mrs. Gardner thought Winnie might have got another summer's wear out of it. Red crepe dresses were not picked up in parsley beds, whatever else might be. But Judy had set her heart on that dress. It was exactly the shade she wanted for the inner petals of the fat raised roses in the fine new rug she was hooking for Aunt Hazel. A rug with golden brown scrolls around its edges, and in the center clusters of red and purple roses, such as never grew on any earthly rose bush. Judy Plum had her name up, as she expressed it, for hooked rugs, and she meant that this should be a masterpiece. It was to be a wedding gift for Aunt Hazel, if that young lady really got married this summer, as, in Judy's opinion, it was high time she should, after all her picking and choosing. Pat, who was greatly interested in the rug's progress, knew nothing except that it was for Aunt Hazel. Also, there was another event impending at Silverbush, of which she was ignorant, and Judy thought it was high time she was warned. When one has been the baby of a family for almost 7 years, just how is one going to take a supplanter? Judy, who loved everybody at Silverbush in reason, loved Pat out of reason and was worried over this beyond all measure. Pat was always after taking things a bit too seriously. As Judy put it, she loved too hard. What a scene she had been after making that very morning because Judy wanted her old purple sweater for the roses. It was far too tight for her, and more holy than righteous, if you please. But Pat wouldn't hear of giving it up. She loved that old sweater, and she meant to wear it another year. She fought so tigerishly about it that Judy, of course, gave in. Pat was always like that about her clothes. She wore them until they simply wouldn't look at her because they were so dear to her she couldn't bear to give them up. She hated her new duds until she had worn them for a few weeks. Then she turned round and loved them fiercely too. "A quare child, if you'll believe me," Judy used to say, shaking her grizzled head. But she would have put the black sign on anyone else who called Pat a queer child. "What makes her queer?" Sidney had asked once, a little belligerently. Sidney loved Pat and didn't like to hear her called queer. "Sure, a leprechaun touched her the day she was born with a little green rose thorn," answered Judy mysteriously. Judy knew all about leprechauns, and banshees, and water kelpies, and fascinating beings like that. "So she can't ever be just like other folks, but it isn't all to the bad. She'll be after having things other folks can't have." "What things?" Sidney was curious. "She'll love folks and things better than most, and that'll give her the great delight. But they'll hurt her more too. 'Tis the way of the fairy gift, and you have to take the bad with the good." "If that's all the leopard did for her, I don't think he amounts to much," said young Sidney scornfully. "Shh!" Judy was scandalized. "Little you know what may be listening to ye, and I'm not after saying it was all. She'll see things. Hundreds of witches flying benight over the woods and steeples on broomsticks, with their black cats perched behind them. How would you like that?" "Aunt Hazel says there aren't any such things as witches, specially in Prince Edward Island," said Sidney. "If you don't be believing anything, what fun are you going to get out of life?" asked Judy unanswerably. "There may never be a witch in P.E. Island, but there's many a one in old Ireland even yet. The grandmother of me was one." "Are you a witch?" demanded Sidney daringly. He had always wanted to ask Judy that. I might be having a little of it in me, though I'm not be way of being a full witch, said Judy significantly. And are you sure the leopard pricked Pat? Sure? Who could be sure of what a fairy might be doing? Maybe it's only the mixed blood in her makes her queer. French and English and Irish and Scotch and Quaker? 'Tis a terrible mixture, I'm telling ye. But that's all so long ago, argued Sidney. Uncle Tom says it's just Canadian now. Oh, said Judy, highly offended. If your Uncle Tom do be knowing more about it than myself, whatever are you here plaguing me to death with your questions for? Scoot, scat, and scamper, or I'll warm your little behind for you. I don't believe there's either witches or fairies, cried Sid, just to make her madder. It was always fun to make Judy plumb mad. Oh, indeed. Well, I knew a man in old Ireland said the same thing. Said it was bold as brass, he did, and he met some one night. Within he was walking home from where he'd no business to be. Oh, what they did to him. What? Demanded Sid eagerly. Never ye be minding what it was. 'Tis better for you never to know. He was never the same again, and he held his tongue about it, the good folk after that. Belave me, only I'm advising ye to be a bit careful what ye say out loud when you think you're all alone, me bold young lad. Part 2. Judy was hooking her rug in her own bedroom, just over the kitchen. A fascinating room, so the Silverbush children thought. It was not plastered. The walls and ceiling were finished with smooth bare boards which Judy kept beautifully whitewashed. The bed was an enormous one with a fat chaff tick. Judy scorned feathers, and mattresses were, she believed, a modern invention of the bad man below. It had pillow slips trimmed with crocheted pineapple lace, and was covered with a huge autograph quilt, which some local society had made years before, and which Judy had bought. Sure, and I likes to lie there a bit when I wakes and looks at all the names of people that are snug underground and me still hearty and kickin', she would say. The Silverbush children all liked to sleep a night now and then with Judy until they grew too big for it, and listened to her tales of the folks whose names were on the quilt. Old forgotten fables, ancient romances. Judy knew them all, or made them up if she didn't. She had a marvelous memory and a knack of dramatic word painting. Judy's tales were not always so harmless as that. She had an endless store of weird yarns of ghosts and rare nice murders, and it was a wonder she did not scare the children out of a year's growth. But they were only deliciously goose-fleshed. They knew Judy's stories were lies, but no matter. They were absorbing and interesting lies. Judy had a delightful habit of carrying a tale on night after night, with a trick of stopping at just the right breathless place which any writer of serial stories would have envied her. Pat's favorite one was a horrible tale of a murdered man who was found in pieces about the house, an arm in the garret, a head in the cellar, a ham bone and a pot in the pantry. It gives me such a lovely shudder, Judy. Beside the bed was a small table covered with a crocheted tidy, whereon lay a beaded, heart-shaped pincushion and a shell-covered box in which Judy kept the first tooth of all the children and a lock of their hair, also a razorfish shell from Australia, and a bit of beeswax that she used to make her thread smooth, and which was seamed with innumerable fine, criss-cross wrinkles like old great-aunt Hannah's face at the bay-shore. Judy's Bible lay there, too, and a fat little brown book of useful knowledge, out of which Judy constantly fished amazing information. It was the only book Judy ever read. Folks, she said, did be more interesting than books. Bunches of dried tansy and yarrow and garden herbs hung from the ceiling everywhere, and looked gloriously spooky on moonlit nights. Judy's blue chest, which she had brought out with her from the old country 30 years ago, stood against the wall, and when Judy was in especial good humor she would show the children the things in it, an odd and interesting mélange, for Judy had been about the world in a bit of her time. Born in Ireland, she had worked out in her teens, in a castle, no less, as the Silverbush children heard with amazed eyes. Then she had gone to England and worked there until a roving brother took a notion to go to Australia, and Judy went with him. Australia not being to his liking, he next tried Canada and settled down on a P.E. Island farm for a few years. Judy went to work at Silverbush in the days of Pat's grandparents, and when her brother announced his determination to pull up stakes and go to the Klondike, Judy coolly told him he could go alone. She liked the island. It was more like the old country than any place she'd struck. She liked Silverbush, and she loved the gardeners. Judy had been at Silverbush ever since. She had been there when Long Alec Gardner brought his young bride home. She had been there when each of the children was born. She belonged there. It was impossible to think of Silverbush without her. With her flair for picking up tales and legends, she knew more of the family history than any of the Gardners themselves did. She never had had any notion of marrying. "I never had but the one beau," she told Pat once. "He serenaded me until windy one night, and I poured a jug of suds over him. Maybe it discouraged him. Anyway, he never got any forander." "Were you sorry?" asked Pat. "Never a bit, me jewel. He hadn't the sense God gave geese anyhow." "Do you think you'll ever marry now, Judy?" asked Pat anxiously. It would be so terrible if Judy married and went away. "Oh, at me age, and me as grey as a cat." "How old are you, Judy Plum?" "'Tis hardly a civil question that, but you're too young to know it. I do be as old as me tongue and a little older than me teeth. Don't be frettin' your little gizzard about me marryin'. Marrying's a trouble and not marrying's a trouble, and I sticks to the trouble I knows." "I'm never going to marry either, Judy," said Pat, "because if I got married I'd have to go away from Silverbush, and I couldn't bear that. We're going to stay here always, Sid and me, and you'll stay with us, won't you, Judy? And teach me how to make cheeses." "Oh, cheeses, is it? Them cheese factories do be making all the cheeses now. There isn't a farm on the island but Silverbush that does be making them. And this is the last summer I'll be doing them, I'm thinking." "Oh, Judy Plum, you mustn't give up making cheeses. You must make them forever. Please, Judy Plum." "Well, maybe I'll be making 2 or 3 for the family," conceded Judy. "Your dad do be always saying the factory ones have the taste of the home-made ones." "How could they, I'm asking ye? Run be the min. What do the men be knowing about making cheeses? Oh, the changes since I first came to the island." "I hate changes," cried Pat, almost in tears. It had been so terrible to think of Judy never making any more cheeses. Mysterious mixing in of something she called rennet, the beautiful white curds next morning, the packing of it in the hops, the stowing it away under the old press by the churn barn with the round grey stone for a weight, then the long drying and mellowing of the big golden moons in the attic. All big save one dear tiny one made in a special hoop for Pat. Pat knew everybody in North Glen thought the Gardners terribly old-fashioned because they still made their own cheeses, but who cared for that? Hooked rugs were old-fashioned too, but summer visitors and tourists raved over them and would have bought all Judy Plum made. But Judy would never sell one. They were for the house at Silverbush and no other. Part 3. Judy was hooking furiously, trying to finish her rose before the dim, as she always called the twilights of morning and evening. Pat liked that. It sounded so lovely and strange. She was sitting on a little stool on the landing of the kitchen stairs, just outside Judy's open door, her elbows on her thin knees, her square chin cupped in her hands, her little laughing face, that always seemed to be laughing even when she was sad or mad or bad, was ivory white in winter, but was already beginning to pick up its summer tan. Her hair was ginger brown and straight and long. Nobody at Silverbush, except Aunt Hazel, had yet dared to wear bobbed hair. Judy raised such a riot about it that Mother hadn't ventured to cut Winnie's or Pat's. The funny thing was that Judy had bobbed hair herself, and so was in the very height of the fashion she disdained. Judy had always worn her grizzled hair short, hadn't time to be fussing with hairpins, she declared. Gentleman Tom sat beside Pat, on the one step from the landing into Judy's room, blinking at her with insolent green eyes, whose very expression would have sent Judy to the stake a few 100 years ago. A big, lanky cat who always looked as if he had a great many secret troubles. Continually thin in spite of Judy's partial coddling. A black cat. The blackest cat I ever did be seeing. For a time he had been nameless. Judy held it wasn't lucky to name a beast that had just come. Who knew what might be offended? So the black grimalkin was called Judy's cat, with a capital, until one day Sid referred to it as Gentleman Tom, and Gentleman Tom he was from that time forth, even Judy surrendering. Pat was fond of all cats, but her fondness for Gentleman Tom was tempered with awe. He had come from nowhere, apparently, not even had been born like other kittens, and attached himself to Judy. He slept on the foot of her bed, walked beside her, with his ramrod of a tail straight up in the air, wherever she went, and had never been heard to purr. It couldn't be said that he was a sociable cat. Even Judy, who would allow no faults in him, admitted he was a bit particular who he spoke to. Sure, and he isn't what you might call a talkative cat, but he do be grand company in his way.